Okay, so you need to know the occupied territories, the most important of which is, of course, the West Bank when we look over here, just by sheer size alone and positioning, you understand it's the most prominent occupied territory and the central issue between Palestinians and Israel in terms of territory, in any case. And understand that these occupied territories, as you can see here, the lifestyle within them is not exactly enviable. All right, the condition of the population, generally speaking, is a poor one. The Palestinians, by and large, have few to little rights, no due process of law, no security, a curfew, little future, and are usually impeded in their daily movements. Something as basic as having a baby is often jeopardized due to the innumerable checkpoints and holdups they have to go through, which is indignant, which is promotes a sense of indignity and imprisonment. Now, let me give you the reasons why Israel has been hesitant to return the West Bank specifically, it being the most important territory. And I'll put up a text graphic here in a minute so that you can get them down a little more easily. You can follow along intuitively now, all right? And again, I'll put up a text graphic in a minute. Why Israel has been hesitant to return the West Bank since 1967, right? So we're talking about, you do the math, 33, 53, whatever, more than a half a century here at this point. First off, as you can see, the West Bank is a large piece of land. I mean, it's about arguably 1/3 to 1/4 the size of the entirety of Israel. And for a nation that's as small as Israel, therefore it represents a lot of space. So that's one particular reason you'd be hesitant to return the West Bank. Again, I'll put up a text graphic in a minute. Secondly, when looking at the West Bank, you can see that it almost divides Israel in two. I mean, it's positioned such to almost divide the country in two. The West Bank almost extends to the Mediterranean Sea, as you can see right over here, leaving a little narrow strip there. It's about somewhere between 7, I believe, or 10 miles in width, something like that. All right. Before Israel is divided in two. And of course, you have to take into account that the core of Israel, where most of its population and development is located, is in a strip running from Tel Aviv here up to Haifa. So the core of Israel is running right through this strip where the West Bank is pressing on. So that is a national security concern. Therefore, you understand how it's going to be a little difficult for Israel to militarily secure the country when Israel could be split by just a few miles penetration by Arabs, foreign Arabs, into that strip. All right, so there's a strategic problem there. The West Bank almost divides the country in two. All right. And just to further that point there, you can see the population density of Israel here, and you can see that strip is just well defined there. There's the West Bank right over here, and you can see the problems with respect to the distribution of population in Israel. All right? Roughly 75% of the country is living in that strip. In any case. Okay. Thirdly, topographically speaking, all right, the West Bank is, located right up in here. This is the West Bank for all intents and purposes, running in here. And topographically speaking, this is the highland. All right, higher land, I should say. It's not particularly high in elevation, but relative to its surroundings. And speaking militarily, it's always to your advantage to hold a military high ground, especially when the West Bank could support just, put it this way, if you could just install some moderate artillery emplacements in the West Bank, you could shell the main development core of Israel quite readily. That's a concern. And another factor related to this being higher ground, aside from its military importance, is that this area generates what a substantial portion of the precipitation that this area has. In fact, if you look at this map here, you can see the West Bank. I roughly put it here in red. And you can see that you get some modest orographic effect that generates water, a lot of it flowing in intermittent streams out of here into Israel. And so the West Bank is a major source of water, which is just the absolutely critical resource for the country of Israel and for the region as a whole. So you can understand why Israel would want to control the West Bank, if just for that reason as well. All right. So let me put up that text transparency. I told you I would, and there it is. All right. Principal reasons why Israel has been reluctant to return the West Bank since occupying it in the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. All right. So you have the ability now to stop this video and record those as you will, so I won't hang here. Now, aggravating this problem of trying to hold on to the West Bank is the fact that Israel has been slowly trying to occupy the West Bank. Not trying, it has been occupying the West Bank. If you look at this map here, you can see here's the West Bank, and Israel has these black areas in here, these black splotches over here, and this map's a little dated now. All right. These are the municipal boundaries of Israeli settlements, where Israel has been sponsoring settlements in this area. The areas in red are formally controlled by a Palestinian Authority. In other words, the Palestinians have a degree, I say a degree of self-rule in these regions. And so what has happened, in 1977, there were only 5,000 Jews who lived with this massive Palestinian population, which is somewhere in the ballpark of 1 million Palestinians, somewhere in there. In 1977, there was only 5,000 Jews, but with the sponsoring of Israeli settlements in the Palestinian West Bank, what occurred, 16 or so years later, by 1993, there were 125,000 who had settled there, reaching about 200,000 now. Actually, I believe it's more than 200,000. My data is a little old here. I believe that was as of 2009. All right, so there's well over 200,000 Jews living amongst, let me correct myself, well over 200,000 Jews living amongst, 2.5 million Palestinians, give or take, roughly speaking. And by the way, these are Palestinians who are understandably going to be rather upset, not only having been displaced from their homeland, if they came from these areas that were Israel, they may be from the West Bank themselves, and if not for that reason alone, they're going to be rather upset at being occupied by Israel. Moreover, what's making the situation worse with respect to the settlements is that these Israelis in these settlements aren't your ordinary Israeli citizens. They're not rather your ordinary run-of-the-mill standard Israeli citizen. They tend to be exceptionally conservative Jews who see going into the Palestinian West Bank as part of a historical holy mission to eject Muslims and reclaim this portion of ancient Israel and Judah. All right? So that's going to aggravate the relationship between Palestinians and Jews. The populations, the Jewish populations that are in the West Bank settlements, do not represent the norm for most of Israel. All right? And so what you can understand if you have a circumstance like this where there's a lot of hostility underlying everything, these Jewish settlements are going to end up being armed camps, as is suggested here. Naturally, they have to be given the right to carry arms because they have inserted themselves amongst a Palestinian population. I suppose you don't have to have that right, but it's going to happen. And of course, the Israelis are allowed to have arms, but the Jewish individuals in the West Bank are allowed to have arms, but the Palestinians are not. And thus, at times when you get surges of hostility between Palestinians and Jews in the West Bank, it's often occurring around the settlements, certainly in the occupied territories, and in particular the West Bank. At times, settlers get targeted by Palestinians for the reasons that you can easily project. All right? Now, so the problem of the settlements aggravates a bad situation already and provokes a strong reaction from the Palestinians, who see themselves as being ejected once again, having essentially lost the country of Palestine, and for many having been ejected from it. Now they went into what was a piece of Transjordan, and they see themselves through these settlements as being ejected, that process of ejection continuing. All right? And so you end up with this situation as suggested over here. You have a rather dire occupation on one hand, all right, where Israel is occupying this Palestinian population, and the Palestinian population resisting that occupation at times. There are intifadas, if you would. There's times when you get a wave of resistance, and then there are quieter periods. Both sides claim that the killing of men, women, and children is unfortunately justified, and that the other side's doing so is not. Unfortunately, you will see this. Often is the Palestinians respond, of course, by using low technology weapons, bombs, this type of stuff. It's because they do not have the money to afford the high technology, high dollar tools of military force, such as jet airplanes and high-tech tanks and missiles and all this type of stuff. But then they are often derided for using these techniques. Well, their argument would be, what should we use? We're going to use rocks and primitive bombs because we can't afford high-tech weapons. Meanwhile, Israel uses high-tech weapons. Folks, these are the characteristics of a lot of the discussion over this issue. I would hope that you would avoid them. You can see the inherent silliness in them. The Israelis want the Palestinians to stop the violent resistance, as does the United States. You'll see the United States is a tight ally with Israel. But the Israelis are not willing to fully stop the expansion of the settlements and remove the remainder of the settlements out of the Palestinian West Bank. So it's a strange request. Stop resisting the, in this case, Israeli expansionism. Mind you, you find interests on both sides, certainly in the settlements, that say this is their land, that the other side is illegitimate, despite the both populations having been there for centuries and centuries and centuries. People will be making the argument, well, our people here was, we were here in the pre-biblical era. Your people were only here in the biblical era. You understand how ridiculous this is getting. Just imagine if somebody used that argument here in North America. the vast majority of the population would have to leave. It's not here of its population. It draws its ancestry from people who just recently came in. All right, that can't be used as an effective argument. And so, therefore, understand that the Palestinians find themselves in a bind, a long-standing bind of being displaced since the formation of Israel in 48. And understand that the basic problem here is not religion. The problem is land. Both sides may be wearing religious uniforms, but the argument isn't religion. Nobody's suggesting that the other's religion needs to disappear, and or they're trying to convert people. It is land. Israel wants enough land to be secure and to thrive in this difficult neighborhood, this Arab Muslim portion of the world, of which Israel has a long-standing, Jews have a long-standing presence here. They're not newcomers. And that means Palestinian land is appropriated. And the Palestinians are concerned principally with this, as this map suggests here. Simply going out of existence. You can see here that the land controlled by Palestinians is yellow, and if you look in at the turn of the century, 1897 essentially, over here, you can see they controlled most of Israel, or excuse me, of Palestine. It wasn't Israel until 48. And you can see as what happens is in 1946, the British were still in control here. You can see the Palestinians still controlling most of this area. Land held by Jews, but a small fraction in here. And then what immediately happens on the lip of Israel becoming a country is, as you can see here, the vast majority fall to control of the land fall to Israel. Palestinians are losing control except for the West Bank. And now you can see over here, the West Bank is even being, this is what, 2012, the West Bank is even slowly being appropriated. The problem for Palestinians, in fact, the fundamental problem is one of land. That's not a depressing point, that's a good point. Problems over land can be solved with a map. Difficult that is, it can happen. But problems over religious doctrine and religious conflict, not going to resolve that by any identifiable process that has any historicity about it. The problem here is one of land. I need you to understand that, because a lot of talking heads want to suggest it's a matter of political philosophy, land, democracy. No, excuse me, they don't say land. All right. It's a matter of righteousness, civilization. No, it isn't. It's a matter of land. Okay. Now, if any of you have a solution to this problem, I would suggest that you write it down and submit it to the United Nations, and hopefully, not hopefully, if it's a good one, you'll win the Nobel Peace Prize. There has been no solution to this problem. Now, if I had time, I would go through various events that have occurred trying to resolve this issue. And a lot of what appeared at times promising schemes to try to resolve this issue were overthrown or disrupted by a terrorist attack. If one side or the other sees something happening that you won't particularly like, all right, you know you're going to get some radical who will do a bombing, a killing, whatever, something like this, and then people will get polarized with fright, and then everything falls apart. I can't go into the numerous attempts there has been to try to resolve this issue. I think it's pretty obvious that there has to be some kind of Palestinian state. And that Palestinian state will represent something like the West Bank and probably the Gaza Strip. Don't hold me to that. I'm just projecting here. Nobody's talking about returning the Golan Heights or making that a piece of a Palestinian state. It's largely between West Bank and the Gaza Strip over here. But in fact, Israel actually removed itself from the Gaza Strip over here in 2006, if I recall. All right. So you might say, well, like pull out of that. That can be a Palestinian state. Not really. They're moving themselves out of the Gaza Strip, changed a little. They still surround and control everything that goes in and out to the best they can over here. There's some interesting smuggling going across the border there with Egypt. In fact, the West Bank is, I believe, has the densest population on Earth. It has a standard Unemployment rate, that's roughly speaking about hangs between 55 and 75%. Can you imagine how terrible the circumstance is on the Gaza Strip? But there has to be some kind of Palestinian state, because the Palestinians simply aren't going to go away, nor is it really likely that anybody's going to propose a genocide of Palestinians, especially the Jewish Israeli population, who themselves have been subject to that type of thing? You can't pull that off easily in the late 20th, 21st century, not with the media culture that allows all that to be recorded effectively. So we need a solution here. We don't have it yet, but there's been some evolution here in this problem in the last 2 decades or so. Let's talk about that